Hi everyone, it's Kino here. Welcome to this accessible Ashtanga Yoga tutorial. Today, we're going to take an exciting look at the first pose of the second series of Ashtanga Yoga called Pasasana position. This is an asana, this is like really hard. It's hard for everyone who's practicing. I've never really met anybody who thought this was an easy pose. Translated into English as the noose pose. So when we're thinking about the second series of Ashtanga Yoga, there are many contraindications, many things that we wouldn't want to rush into this. However, if you've been practicing for a long time and then you find yourself in a situation where we need to adapt the asana, it's good to understand what are the key essential nature of the asana and how can we adapt the pose to where our bodies are for each day. If we have a long-term practitioner who's chair-bound, they shouldn't be stuck only in the primary series. We should be able to open up some of the second series for them as well. Being in the relationship to the practice, that student understands, how to work the tapas, how to really respect the practice, and not just try things just here and there. We're really looking to go deeply into our practice. So now looking at Pasasana, we have for those of you familiar with the pose, it's a squatting pose where we squat and twist, which are, involving closing the hip joints, rolling the femurs into the posterior portion of the hip capsule, working with a lateral stretch, and then finally working with the spinal twist. I'm actually going to get that second block out as well, because one of the things that happens when we find ourselves chair-bound or recovering from joint replacement surgery is that the range of motion that we once took for granted might not be there. So working with a parallel position, the first thing to explore is how much hip flexion is accessible. So we just work through perhaps placing the forearms near the knees and experiencing what level of hip flexion is accessible. So this would be sort of the first foundational element of Pasasana. And this is if you're trying from the floor where you would squat and bring your chest really close to your thighs. Then the next thing that happens in Pasasana is that we're going to laterally move the torso. So then kind of cross over the hands. And this is the place where you can remember the twisting variations from Parsvakonasana B. We can take the forearm of the right arm on the lower portion of the left thigh, draw the navel in, and look over to the left. We could reach the hand back to the backrest, or we could place the hands in prayer position. Depending on what feels better for us, notice that the right knee kind of wants to gravitate out. Instead, keep it tracking towards the center. Let's look at another option when we come over to the side. Perhaps it's too much to actually try to do that lateral stretch over that could put too much pressure on the hip. If you have a labrum tear or something like that in the hip joint, lateral movement with a closed hip position might be a little bit too much. Now in this case, we can take that same forward fold, but instead of the lateral movement, we'll simply remove the folding around that forward hip and then begin to open twist. So this begins to be more of an open twist, which is a similar variation that we did for the standing poses, and we can take the arm out to the side, or again, we can take hands in prayer. The open twist variation may allow you to internally rotate the shoulder and reach the right hand back and around towards the hip. All right? Then we can come on back into the center. And again, thinking about the essential nature of Pasasana, squatting, twisting, and then being able to make that accessible. Now, Pasasana position can also be tried while seated on the blocks, but this is a more advanced variation where we're just really working our way into the pose. When we're thinking of an adaptive version, a truly accessible version, we want to try to understand, okay, what other options are there? If we are slightly more mobile, which means that we can close the front of the hip, but we're not able yet to squat, so try to think about what kind of individual would be able to close the front of the hip but not take the knee more than 90 degrees. In this variation, my feet come together because maybe there's no restriction in the hip, but there's restriction in the knees. Someone that can't squat may have problems with the ankles. There maybe have fractured or broken the ankle and have hardware there, or have joint replacement in the knees prohibiting a bend more than 90 degrees. And in this case, we can again close the hip joint, reach down, find that hands in prayer position, looking over to the left. We can try again with the other side, where we reach down, maximizing the lateral stretch. And another option is to let that left hand reach to the ground and the right arm reach up, to get that feeling of more opening with the chest. Or if hands in prayer feels better, we can go for that option, or dangling the arm around the side so we kind of graze the upper edge of the thigh. And we're thinking about all these options to really get the essential nature of Pasasana, the fold and the twist. So remember that these are not options that are meant to be just easy. These are options that are meant to be challenging for the student. And whether you're guiding yourself through the practice or another individual, the key will always be to find what is the comfortable discomfort that will create just enough challenge so that the student can grow from their experience of the practice, but not so much so they feel overwhelmed or so it becomes harmful for them. So keep that in mind as we're taking the paradigm of accessibility to the Ashtanga yoga method. I hope you find the inspiration to keep practicing.